So today we will continue our story in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.' Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search carefully for the young child. And when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also.' When they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, 'Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him.' When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, 'A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted, because they are no more.' Now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, 'Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead.' Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judah instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, 'He shall be called a Nazarene.'" So, we have a number of things going on in this particular chapter. First of all, this is the only place in the scriptures that the story of the wise men or magi coming from the east to visit Jesus ever occurs. So we don't have to look elsewhere to figure out if there's other information about this occurrence. And when you see the story, when you take a close look at it, you see that this story is nothing like the modern nativity scenes.
No. He didn't come when he was in the manger.
He did not show up when he was in the manger. So, it's really important that we understand that that's the case. The chapter here clearly indicates, first of all, that this is a narrative of things that are taking place and not necessarily giving us a careful attendance to exactly what's happening when. But some things are so clearly spoken of for the purpose of telling us the when about certain things. Okay? So, chapter 2, verse 1 in our Bible says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king." Can also be just stated, equally translated, "Moreover, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea." Okay? In other words, it's a narration of saying, okay, in this time period, this is what happened. Okay? That's one of those things that's not trying to be incredibly specific for its time.
But there's no way of taking it that would mean before he was born.
It would be clear that it would not be before he was born. It's at least the day he was born or after, by the language that's in the original Greek text. Okay? And as we read on, we see that these wise men, called magi, what we call magi, are coming from the east to Jerusalem. So you'd have to have some idea of the geography of the area. And something very clear to you should be this. If I am in a place, Jerusalem, and people are coming to me from the east, which direction are they looking when they're traveling?
Looking west.
Well, they're looking to the west.
They have to be looking west. That's an important thing to realize as you're going through these stories. It should cause you question. I'm going to give you the understanding of that in just a minute as we go forward. So if you're the easterly point and you're traveling west, you're looking west. Okay? And the Magi show up saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star," where?
Well, they saw a star.
Says in the east.
Yeah.
Now, if they were looking from where they came from to Jerusalem, why would they say they've seen it in the east when they're looking west?
The only thought I would have is that they were saying, we have seen it in the east. Where we were, which was east of here, is where we saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Where we are now, we don't see it.
Okay?
Otherwise, they wouldn't even be asking. They'd still be following their star.
That is one possible answer.
They've seen it in the west.
But then if they take their trip to go after wherever that king is, that is where that star is representing them, why would they travel west if they saw it east of them? And they're attempting to go visit that king.
We'd have to delve into why did a star mean there was a new king anyway. We'd have to figure out, what their understanding and customs were.
Yeah, so they...
I know with him where he says, "For we have seen his star in the east," meaning when we were in the east, we saw his star. Not that we saw it in the east. We were standing in the east where we're from and saw it.
Yeah, potentially.
And the only reason I say that is because then, why wouldn't they be able to see it now? If they just look east and they would see the star. But then they see it later.
No, I don't think they don't want to see it. I think they're saying, where is he? Because we saw a star when we were over in the east, and it should be here somewhere. He should be here somewhere, and this is this direction.
So that would require different prepositions to make those statements, which we don't have.
Maybe the star moved.
Well, it clearly does.
So this term east is not actually a navigable term. It is a term that is used, that is derived because of what the word actually means.
Is that like Negev and south? The kind of thing is when they say in the Negev?
And that means the southern region because of where the Negev is.
Right.
Okay? And so the term east has really to do with the rising of the sun and the stars. Okay? And so you can use it to mean, just like we do a lot of words, depending on the context, what it might actually mean. Right? So, Lee pointed out yesterday, stuffing can be used as a verb or a noun. How do you know how it's being used?
In the context of...
So you have to know that by the context, right? So that's the same way with all other words that have potentially multiple meanings. So the context then becomes very important. Now we have our Bibles that are translations from people who have decided we think this is what the meaning of the word is in its context. Sometimes they may not get it exactly right. And I'm going to offer you other possible solutions to some of these challenges. And so, the statement, for we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him, they can simply mean we have seen his star in the place where the sun and the stars rise and have come to worship him. Where's the place where the sun and the stars rise to? The sky, to start with. Right? Look up. You see, these things could have these types of meanings and don't have to necessarily mean east. I'm going to say to you, I think this is a valid explanation. As I take you forward, I'm going to help you to understand why I think this is a valid explanation. Okay? Because first of all, these wise men and the word that's used for them are used for people who would be anything from a sorcerer or an astrologer or a magician, what they call magicians. But these were the people who were considered to have special insight in their cultures. Okay? Some of it definitely demonic. And the only way these guys would have noticed a particular star would be these guys would have to be people who would have some understanding of what the regular stars in their area look like and are. You follow? If you went out for the first time ever and looked up and saw the stars, how would you discern if there was a new one there or not?
You'd have to know them.
So these are men who clearly had a significant amount of study, time, and knowledge of what stars were normally there, and have now said, hey, that's a new one. You follow? And somehow they would have to believe, now they can do this based upon superstition or revelation from God, because if you're an astrologer and you see a new star, you're going to think that has some meaning. Right? And the meaning that you're going to think it has is going to be dependent upon what you think about that star and where it is. So, if these men would have chased a star that came up new out in the middle of an uninhabited desert wasteland, do you think they would have said, this is the star of the king of anything?
Well, we depend upon their background, their instruction, their religion, their culture.
Well, so a star would be commonly associated with deity and divinity.
Okay. What if it was a traveling star?
That would be part of their... they would come up with answers for those questions as to why they think that's fits into their storyline, if you will. But a new star to come up, don't forget all the way back to Nimrod, he's using stars and moons to convince the people of false gods. Okay, way back in the earliest parts of Genesis we talked about that. And so people in this same area, which is the area of Nimrod, would have still been looking at the stars as similar types of signs. And if it chased them out in the middle of nowhere and there was no population and no other people around, why would they associate the star with a person? That wouldn't make any sense. But when you chase the star to a place that's inhabited, and a particular group is the dominant group there, if not almost the exclusive group there, then you can clearly see how they would associate a star with those people, and the star represents now the new leader of those people.
Yeah, however they did that, we don't really have that understanding of
No.
why they associated that star with that place, because they saw it over the land.
That's right.
They read the formation of the stars, because people do that nowadays. Oh, this planet's aligned up with this planet, and this thing's in this grade.
Right.
It means that.
Right. And so that's an interesting subject about looking up into the cosmos and talking about stars. This star has attributes that takes it out of the cosmos.
It later does, yes. We don't know if it did yet, but it does afterwards.
Somehow it caught their attention and drove them from where they were much further east on quite a journey.
Yeah, they didn't do the journey in, a fortnight.
And so as we continue to read on, they have come to worship the one that star represents, which in the Eastern religions and many gods being out there, that would not be uncommon for them to do. They want to cover all the bases.
It wasn't that they were particularly religious as far as the Abrahamic religion would have gone.
Or knowledgeable that this was...
Just another one?
Yeah, that's right.
Covering their bases?
That's exactly correct. It could have very well been just covering their bases. It also could have been they had special knowledge that God gave to them. Clearly He's communicating with them in here at some point. Maybe they had special knowledge that this was the one true God and they were turned. We don't get that part of the story because that's not the part God thought was most relevant to tell us. The parts He did tell us, however, are these men knew that the purpose for them to chase down this star was to find the one the star represented and worship Him. So even in their ignorance or in their knowledge, they knew that the primary objective was to worship Him. And they have gone on quite a journey to do this. Now, first thing Herod does, who is the king in the area serving under Caesar, is go and ask the local people where the Christ was to be born. You notice the Magi came and said, we're looking for the King of the Jews. And then we get the question of, where is the Christ to be born? That Herod's inquiring. Why isn't he inquiring where the King of the Jews is to be born? Why is that not the language? So do you see how God is associating the Christ with the King of the Jews for us here?
In the text that we have written, I mean, it doesn't necessarily indicate that Herod went and asked, where is the Christ to be born? Just he was asking this guy, they're talking about this King of the Jews, where is that? And God is letting us know that was the Christ. Not that Herod understood that.
We don't know what Herod's question specifically was.
Right. But clearly, yes.
But who is this key figure? Where would this key figure that you guys are all expecting that would be worthy of a star, where would he be born? Now, the respondents would probably tell him what that meant to them, but they clearly give him an answer. In other words, they don't cut him out of the loop of communication and say, gosh, we can't tell you. They answer his question. In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written. And he quotes Micah the prophet. In verse 6, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And so, this language to the Jews and now to Herod is prophetic language that they are knowledgeable of. They're looking for, that would be one of the criteria for vetting the reality of their king, their coming Messiah, their Christ, would be that he has to be born in Bethlehem. So anybody not born in Bethlehem, disqualified right off the bat. And so one of the simple parts of the test is that he has to be born in Bethlehem. And so Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. Now, we know later that he chooses to kill all male children 2 years old and under, indicating clearly that these guys didn't see the star, then travel to the day he was born,
No.
and find him there.
Well, we're told they saw the young child. They didn't see the infant. They didn't see the baby. They saw the young child.
Well, we have to be careful with that, because as much as I agree with you, he's a young child, we have to be careful of the words that are being used, because that word is significant and can be misleading in that kind of an argument. But I'll get there in just a minute. The point is, the star appears not when the Holy Spirit impregnates Mary. The star appears the day of his birth. The star is the announcement of his birth. And they're now getting on this journey to come and find where the star rests, to locate this person the star represents.
I mean, it's an assumption, though, isn't it?
No.
It's not stated in the text.
No, so...
As far as the star was that day that he was born. It's more just a herald of his birth. We don't know exactly when the star appeared.
So, do we have the words that say the star could have only appeared on the day of his birth? Clearly, we didn't read those words, so they're not there.
And the shepherds in the field, the star appeared, and
There's the answer to the question. You go to Luke's Gospel.
said the baby was born.
That's how you find the answer. You go to Luke's Gospel, and you find none of the story of the Magi, but you find the star appearing to them, and Jesus' birth, and the angels appearing to them and announcing to them the birth of Jesus. And the shepherds go and meet with Joseph and Mary and Jesus and worship the Lord at the giving of the mercy of God upon them, right? And so it's important that we also understand these guys have come from a great distance. And these are
all the way across the Saudi Arabia to the
That's right, and these guys are wealthy guys. So it's not just three guys, even though it says...
They have an entourage.
Yeah, and we say three. You know why we say three, by the way?
There's 3 gifts.
Because there's 3 gifts. We don't know if it's 23.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really say that
Okay.
the star in that glory in the highest.
No, but the announcement in Luke is at the time of his birth.
I know, and an angel came and there was...
The star is the announcement of his birth. Okay? And these guys have come from a long way away. There's absolutely no chance they arrived there in the first week.
Oh, no.
So you have to understand that the passages in Luke's gospel through his circumcision and all of that are done before the wise men ever get there.
Yeah, and Herod covers all the bets by assassinating all the firstborn male children 2 years.
2 years old and under.
So he gives it a couple years for them to have gotten there.
Well, because you have to remember, the standard...
Right, all male children, right.
The standard for their way of operating would be, just like I talked to you about how a scribe would write down the text that they were supposed to copy. These wise men would have had a very similar structure in their cultures and how they would do things. So you've got to remember, you're a group of people, and your job is to be the people who have this special knowledge of things that when you're called upon, you can give an answer for. Right? And so you're this group, and you're studying the cosmos. And one of your group says, hey, that wasn't there yesterday. Do you think they instantly all just hop on a camel and start running toward Jerusalem?
They start asking other people that know about other things.
What
Of
does
course.
All this
There's meetings going on and conversation and discussion and all.
Is there any writing somewhere that talk about?
And what should we do about it, if anything, and all that stuff's discussed for a while.
Well, otherwise they wouldn't have known to say, where is this King of the Jews supposed to have been born? If they knew it had something to do with the Jews.
Furthermore, the location of the star drives them to a location.
Right.
Okay, without argument, all of the stars in the cosmos that we have watched send us in a direction, but not to a location. Ever.
Right, they can be used for navigation.
They're used for navigation, and no matter where you are on the planet, it's a navigable chart, if you will. But if I'm in the United States and I look for the North Star, I'm going to go north, right? As the world turns around, that doesn't become the South Star in Australia. Okay? You're going to keep going north. Why? Until you keep going around and around and around and around the planet. Why? Because it's so far away it can never be close enough to take you to a specific spot on the planet. This star takes them to a specific spot on the planet.
Well, not only that, but if you look at the map of where Jerusalem is compared to Bethlehem, when they get to Jerusalem, they say, where is this? We've been seeing a star. Where is it? Because it's not
where's
that...
the star? Where's the king? Where's the
Where's
person?
the king, I mean, because the star's got to be close by. They said in Bethlehem that he's supposed to be born. If you look at the map, Bethlehem and Jerusalem are...
You're not very far apart.
No, they're not very far apart.
But still not that
a mile or two, I don't remember how many they were, but it's only a couple miles, a few miles apart. And so they know he's there somewhere in their surroundings, because the star must be close by if it was over Bethlehem.
And when they're in Jerusalem, the star is able to discriminate for them the difference between where the child is from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So it's close enough for them to have an indication that the child is in Bethlehem, not Jerusalem.
Well, that's why I think that originally they saw the star, they interpreted its meaning, and were able to go, it's for the Jews, it's for the Jewish area where the Hebrew people are, the capital of which was Jerusalem. So they went to Jerusalem and asked the guy in charge, hey, where is this new king? I don't think they were following the star yet. Once they leave and they say, oh, we're headed to Bethlehem, well, we'll go there and look for it.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Then it says the star then moved and went before them. And they were like, what's the star? And they just followed it. Made their job a lot easier. They didn't have to go search door to door and try to find something. I don't see indication that they had followed it to Jerusalem. Just that they had interpreted the meaning to be it's Jewish kings. So they went to Jerusalem and asked. Otherwise, why ask? If you're following a star, you need to ask.
Right,
Are
if
you
they
doing
were
what you're
if they followed
Well,
it.
but the star, unless the star goes and sets itself up on top of a particular house,
It does.
I understand, but it hasn't in Jerusalem. So here's the thing. You're, call it for lack of a better term, an astrologer. You see a star in the sky that appears that hasn't been there before, and you consult all your charts and you're saying, that wasn't there. And you got some people in your group saying, you're nuts, of course it was there, you just missed it. And so they keep watching it. What would that star do to indicate to that group that they didn't just miss it before? That it really is something special? What do you think the types of things it could do?
Be more brilliant, be moving.
You follow? So,
when the Earth is rotating, the stars are doing their thing in
It could not
relation, and it could not move.
like all the other stars
as
do.
days go, the constellations travel.
Sweep through the heavens.
so the answer is,
The star stays where it is. So now, in 3 days, it's over. Compared to the rest of the constellations, it's not in the same place.
so the answer is, it would have unique characteristics,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Now, whatever those unique characteristics are, it indicated to these guys they needed to go to Jerusalem.
The capital.
Now, stars can do a lot of things and send you in a direction, but it's not necessarily going to tell you where to stop if it stays up in the cosmos.
No, but I agree with what Alex said, that they know it's something related as they've asked questions and studied, and as to the Jews, that's where would they go, but to the epicenter of the Jews.
So let's think through that for a minute. So the Jews have nowhere necessarily in their writings that the star would be an indication
Up to them.
that their Messiah was born. Number one. Number two, there are many religions at this time with lots of things that they believe, and stars having meaning for a lot of things. And given that quantity of information, how would they discriminate except for God indicates to them? There's one of two possibilities that I come up with. Either God gives them a special revelation, go to Jerusalem, because this star means I have done something spectacular, or God gives the star unique characteristics that in those characteristics indicate to them they should do something different.
I see both as equally viable.
You follow? And so either God has spoken to them, or I see God taking that star and doing something very unique with it in its movement, where they perceive that it's going to Israel, and they're going to follow that star because its conduct is so different than the other stars, it draws them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can conclude from the rest of the text that it's not a star.
After all the pillar of fire moved.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it changed from day and night, from fire to cloud.
Right.
So this star becomes so uniquely characterized by God that it gets them to validate what they've been told, where the King of the Jews was to be born, by standing over Bethlehem so closely that they knew to leave Jerusalem and go to Bethlehem, and you're only talking about a few miles journey. Okay? That's how uniquely characterized that star is behaving. Does that make sense? So this process is going to take some time. It takes so much time that in Herod's inquiry, he figures he better give a 2-year window of possibility so that he doesn't miss killing this potential king of the Jews.
Well, because he says that he met with them secretly and determined what time the star appeared.
That's right.
So that's how he judges. 2 years could have gone by.
That's how he judges to decide to kill them up to 2 years old, because he has clearly been told by them they didn't just see it starting today.
No.
Yeah. How long did it take you to get here?
And they've sat around having meals together, and they've talked about, when you first saw the star, what did you do? What were your discussions like? What did other people think? How did you decide which guys would come? You know, all that stuff was probably discussed in there sitting
Herod
together.
was a wuss, because he really trembled at the notion that it was a usurper that might, interfere with his reign.
Well, certainly he was threatened by anything that would take him out of his favored position, and he wanted to put an end to that forthwith. And so it's really important that we see these dynamics in the story. And why is this important? Well, because what we don't want to do is support a false premise for things that go on in the name of Christ. That's what we don't want to do. Furthermore, these gifts that were given by this entourage of wise men to whom?
Gave him to the child.
Gave them to Jesus, right? These were offered to him directly.
They worshipped him and gave him the gift.
Yeah, and these are symbols of, they thought he had divine existence. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And this is their way of worshiping either a God or the God, and we don't know what they thought. Okay? So for me, this is why I can't cooperate with our modern Christmas traditions, because this story is very different from what we would call our modern Christian traditions.
Well, yeah, there's nothing in here.
There's nothing similar to our story except some of the players.
They were there the way our modern stories have it. Nothing at all.
Nothing.
Anything you would look at, go, okay, where, when, and indicates the opposite of what they show.
And furthermore, the gifts that were given were focused on one individual. There were no gifts that were going to be given to each other. The focus of the event of their meeting the child Jesus was to worship Him, period. And so all of the attention is focused on Him. So Christmas, if it's going to be a celebration, by the way, which is never spoken of in the Scriptures, and we're never encouraged by God to celebrate the birth of Jesus.
We were never encouraged to celebrate the birth of Jesus.
No place in the Scriptures to celebrate the birth of Jesus. The shepherds are encouraged to celebrate the mercy of God, but not because birthdays of anybody are particularly important. It doesn't mean birthdays are bad to celebrate. I'm just saying the Scriptures don't tell us that the birth of Jesus is something to be celebrated ever anywhere. And then the way we celebrate, pardon me, go ahead.
No, I didn't answer my question.
Yeah, and the way we celebrate the birth of Jesus is because some people saw that they were not successful at getting other people to participate in their religious governance. And so what they did is they produced a hybrid, a combination of these pagan celebrations and Christian themes, and produced Christmas in a season that there's no chance Jesus was born in, to start with, and includes players that were not there at the time of His birth. And the gifts are not given at the time of His birth, they're given much later. So they're not celebrating His birth at all, they're simply celebrating His existence. But this is the basis of the story that we've borrowed from to try to decide that we should celebrate the birth of Jesus, when it doesn't have anything to do with a celebration at the birth of Jesus. Does that make sense? So, that doesn't mean I think there's anything wrong with giving each other gifts. There's lots of reasons why I think it's a good idea to give each other gifts. But if I'm going to celebrate the birth of Jesus, I'm not going to give you a gift. No different than if we just recently celebrated Alex's birthday. Why didn't we give gifts to Zachary, Stephen, and Jacob on Alex's birthday?
Because it was Alex's birthday.
Because it was Alex's birthday. Why is it the only time that we break the rule on who we give the gifts to is when we celebrate, supposedly, the birth of Jesus? Why don't we give them to Him, if that's His birthday we're celebrating?
People have no idea how to give them gifts.
You follow where I'm going with this?
We had no idea what He would regard as a gift.
We are so twisted and confused about all of this, we have lost complete track of any sanity of it. And it's just a matter of making ourselves feel better. That's all it's about. And that's fine, but don't claim then it's a birth celebration of Jesus. Claim it's something else. Anything else.
Time we want to get together.
Time we want to get together and have a party and give each other gifts. Great.
We were saying, we want to still do that to each other because we love each other and we be fun.
Still do that.
We like doing it, but we're not going to say it's about Jesus at all.
It may be the only family time all year long for some folks.
Right.
Well,
That's fine, we celebrate.
and it would be more common to our traditions that we would do something like that on a New Year's celebration than we would December 25th, because if you remove the connotation of December 25th being the birth of Jesus from it completely and just wipe that off the slate, the only thing you have left is the winter solstice.
Right.
That's all you have left
Right.
for that day. Otherwise, it has no peculiarity otherwise.
21st or something anyway.
Okay? It's right. It's not even on the actual day.
But to do it, that's what.
But in order for the church not to fight with the winter solstice celebrations, they couldn't put it on the same day. They had to put it in the same season. And those people, what were they interested in doing? Having a party that they would throw to themselves. And that's how it was birthed and born. Okay? The other thing you should also know is Christmas isn't even celebrated on December 25th throughout the world.
Oh, no, the Russians celebrate it in January.
Russians celebrate Christmas?
Yeah, third week in January.
The third week in January.
And so do a lot of other parts of the world, by the way. So you'll find that Christmas has a month-long period, depending on where you are in the world, that can be celebrated. So here's the next thing. If this was actually the birth of Jesus, do you think God would get it so mixed up that he couldn't figure out the day to get the whole world on the same page?
Right, why would he even tell us?
He'd be able to figure it out. If he wanted us to celebrate it, he'd make it very clear, like he did for all the other celebrations, exactly what it was supposed to
You
be,
follow?
exactly what we're supposed to do.
So that's why this is such an important thing for us to realize. So why is this important? It's important because we want to be clear about what we do in our lives and how it implicates the glorification of Jesus or not. Okay, that's why it's important. So we want to get together and have a party and give gifts to each other. Great, let's do it. And we can adopt all sorts of times to do it. Birthdays being one of them. Okay? Wedding anniversaries being another. New Year's being another. Okay? There's all sorts of times for us to do that. But let's not take that kind of a thing and call it celebrating the birth of Jesus when the celebration has little or nothing to do with the birth of Jesus at any level, except it's an excuse to get as many people. It's a commercialization.
Like on Bad Mama's Christmas last night, one of the women's mothers comes to visit unexpectedly and everything, and she's all criticizing her. You don't have a Christmas tree yet? It's December the 21st. The Jews have their trees up by now.
The Jews have their trees up by now. So, do you see where I'm going with this? If we pay attention to what he has said to us and given to us, then we can avoid misrepresenting him to other people.
Right.
That's what's so important. And what I want to make sure I do is avoid misrepresenting him to other people. So if we get into a conversation where people say, well, I want to celebrate Christmas because that's celebrating the birth of Christ, let's get into a further conversation with them of why is celebrating the birth of Christ so important to you? And how does your life demonstrate it?
Okay.
You follow?
Well, people will say, even though God doesn't say to celebrate it, that the fact that God gave us this amazing story about it, that's why we're supposed to celebrate it. Well, that doesn't, I get that there's an amazing story that he shared with us and what took place, but I don't see how it's still, obviously we know that the pagan celebration of Christmas didn't come from anything in here. They just tried to tie it in. But even still, just because God shares a story doesn't mean we're supposed to celebrate it.
Right. Well, first, this story in Matthew 11 all takes place post, significantly, the birth of Jesus. So for its context to be included in the attempt of the story of celebrating the birth of Christ is misplaced greatly.
Right.
Okay?
I have that argument too, but
And if you look at the story of the birth of Christ, the people that were told were the poorest, who had very little except animals. They weren't asked to sacrifice any of them. And what they were giving was worship to the Lord after He revealed Himself to them. What they did as a result was praise the Lord. If we're going to celebrate the birth of Christ, that should be really the conduct, because that's the only representation of what happened at the time of His birth.
well, that's what those
Nobody gave gifts to each other.
Christians will say, well, we do. We go to church and we have
Only give
worship time.
to Christ. What do you mean?
But not even at His birth. The only gift given at the time of His birth was God giving the gift of Christ to the world. And our response was the joy and thankfulness for such a great gift that God has brought salvation to us.
Because the Messiah is here.
Yeah, the only gift the shepherd gave was telling other people about it.
Yeah, and then finally the name is all fouled up, because the name Christmas, by the way, is a Latin-derived name that has to do with the death of Christ, not even the birth of Christ.
Christ's Mass.
Christ's Mass is about the death of Christ. So, that all being said, if we want to get together and have our own celebration of enjoying one another's company, celebrating one another's lives, and giving gifts to one another, let's do it. But let's not do it in the name of celebrating the birth of Jesus. Does that make sense?
You made a good point that New Year's is a good time. It's a new year to celebrate what we've done in the past to glorify God, and what what our goals are and our celebration of His gift to us for the coming year.
Yeah.
What He's given to us, what He's blessed us with, how can we further glorify Him in what's to come?
And so in these passages, you have God validating Micah as a true prophet. He's validating Hosea as a true prophet. He's validating Jeremiah as a true prophet. Micah, Hosea, and Jeremiah. The other prophets are unnamed in 23, and we're not sure who they are. And so that's a difficult one to find out specifically who he's speaking about, but it's not just one, it's multiples, because it's the plural of prophet. It's prophets. That which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. We don't know who those are. There are clearly some writings that God refers to that we don't have copies of. Why we don't have copies of? Ultimately boils down to God chose not to preserve those copies.
Or yet.
Yeah, or maybe yet they'll be discovered. The problem with current discoveries of any so-called professed copies of ancient writings that were determined by God is all of them have been proven to be false since the canonization of the Bible.
Except for the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, but they're not new. They're just these.
No,
They're just writings of these books already. If it's a writing that's not included in the Bible, then every one of those that has come since then has been proven to be false.
And they took the fragments from the Dead Sea and then studied them and studied them and said, okay, what corrections did you come up with?
Yeah. Nothing of any substance. A couple of articles.
It was green instead of yellow. Or whatever.
If you notice, God knows in this story, because He has told the story in advance of what will happen at this time, that when the Messiah is given, that Rachel is going to mourn. Rachel was the preferred wife of Jacob for the founding of the nation Israel. And so she represents all of Israel at this point in this particular prophecy. And she is weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they're no more, because they were killed. So God's doing a number of things simultaneously here. He is acknowledging His mercy and His salvation. At the same time, He's bringing His wrath upon some people. This simultaneous working of God is important that we understand this, because a lot of people think it's a sequential model. That He's going to do this, and then He's going to do that, and then He's going to do the other. When God may be doing these things all simultaneously. And the question about what we are going to experience may have to do with where we stand in Christ. So Joseph and Mary, why was their child not killed?
They escaped to Egypt. Because
that's what they did.
The angel came to Joseph in a dream.
Because they heard the word of the Lord and they obeyed.
He said, do this, and Joseph did.
What if he would have heard and not obeyed? He'd have been killed with the rest of them.
I mean, Jesus would have been kept alive potentially because God would have done that to fulfill His plan, but they may not have been.
You follow where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
The reason they didn't experience the wrath that was to come through the hand of Herod is because they heard the word of the Lord and they paid attention and they obeyed.
And so He probably picked them. He could foresee what they were going to do, and
He knew they would listen, that Joseph would listen.
In the midst of, and he's already been tested once, right?
And react appropriately.
What will you do about Mary? I'm telling you, I want you to take her as your wife. Don't be afraid. And she'll give birth to a son. You're to call his name Jesus. He's already done that. And remember from last week what I talked about is the risk and sacrifice that he would have had to make in order for that to take place. So he has demonstrated a faithfulness to God despite the cost to himself. God's already shown, or God's already, I got to be careful how I say this. Joseph has already demonstrated that he is willing to listen to the Lord and follow His instructions. And so that, if we look at the constant theme throughout the Scriptures, is the formula for not having to be a person who personally experiences the wrath of God. That's the formula. That we hold His word in high esteem and that we obey His word. Even if it doesn't necessarily make sense. Because getting off to Egypt would not make a whole lot of sense.
That would not be a small thing either.
Yeah. And think about it from Joseph's perspective. What have you done? You've gone from where you were to Bethlehem because that's your father's house and you're there for the census and to pay the taxes, right? And so then while you're there, your wife gives birth to the son, and what do? You put down roots and stay for a while to the point where you have a house, a residence there.
And
Okay, this word house?
work. You work, you eat. So
Yeah.
probably
This word house, the translated house, has to do with a residence of someone. That would not have been where the feeding trough was that Jesus was laid in after he was born. Okay? The only way in the Jewish culture that those two would be blended together in a house was that somebody has built a multi-story complex, and the lowest story is where they house and feed the animals, and they live in the next upper story. This is the story of Jephthah, if you remember, when he says the first thing coming out of the house I will dedicate to God, because he's thinking one of the animals on the bottom floor and outruns his daughter. And he's heartbroken. That's because the only way you would have a feeding trough in the house would be having a multi-story house built. Well, clearly that's not the story of Mary and Joseph. They arrived looking for a place to put their head for the night. There's no room in the inn. They're sent out to a barn, and Jesus is laid in a feeding trough. So when they come and find him in a house, this is an indication that time has passed significant enough for Joseph to put down roots and be employed gainfully enough to have a residence of their own. These are also indicators of what's going on. Okay? What's also interesting is none of these gifts were given to Joseph and Mary. As a matter of fact, other than the fact that they're just mentioned, that Jesus is with them, they're silent players in the story. Clearly, the object of the story is Jesus. Now, this word child that you brought up a bit earlier, Lee, can be used for any person shortly after they're born up and until the next stage of life into adolescence.
So, even into adolescence, so not, so beyond the age of 7 years.
Yes.
Could possibly be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it can be used in a lot of ways. And if you look at, I'm not going to have you do this right now, but if you look at the Gospel of Luke, Gospel according to Luke, you will find that he is first called a babe when he is born, but within the 8 days before his circumcision, he's already called the child.
Wow.
And there are two different words. Babe is brephos in Greek. Child is paidion. And this paidion is the word we find here in Matthew, but it's also the same word used for him within the 8 days before he's circumcised. It says they took the child to the temple to be circumcised. That's paidion. So he was brephos, babe, when he was first born, because that word has to do with right before they're born and then right at birth. But after that, you can start using the word child for them without any difficulty in their culture. Okay?
To another reason the wise man wouldn't have been there at his birth, because he would have been called a babe.
Correct. That's the point I was going to make is, so it doesn't tell us exactly how old he is, except that he's not a brephos.
Okay.
And God took the time to tell us at his birth, in Luke, he was a brephos, a babe. Nowhere is that word used in Matthew chapter 2.
Suggesting there was a real clear purpose in selecting the word to describe his.
Exactly right. Exactly correct. Selecting that he was purposeful in the words that he chose to make sure he delineated between seasons and ages. Right? And so as we go forward here, this story is very helpful for us to realize that the focal point of what God is trying to do for us is to be Jesus. And if we're going to be celebrating anything about him, then whatever that celebration is needs to be him as the focal point. Not as a barnacle just carrying along in our own machinations of the things that we want to do to please ourselves. And so if we want to have a celebration for the birth of Jesus, I also don't see it being prohibited. So there's no reason why we can't do it. Let's just make sure we do it appropriately, correctly, where we aren't the object of the pleasure and the party and all of those things. He needs to be the object. He needs to be the focal point, if that's what we're going to say we're doing. Does that make sense? Any other questions or comments about that set of passages?
If we use the summary statement, Jesus is the reason for the season, how does that sit with you?
So, what would we be saying if we say Jesus is the reason for the season? So, the season is
Christmas.
Not a general statement, it's a particular statement, right?
Right.
So, the season of what?
We're celebrating Christmas, which is not about Jesus at all.
And it's not about the birth of Jesus, but the death of Jesus. So if Jesus is the reason for the season, the question is, how are we demonstrating that we're going to be celebrating the reason for the season the way He has prescribed for us to celebrate Him as the reason for the season?
Yeah.
I asked them if they said that, and like, hey, what do you mean by that? Like,
Right, what do you mean by that? What do you mean, what season are you talking about when you say the season? And you might find a very interesting answer to that. Because if you say, well, it's about the birth of Jesus. No, that's the part that Jesus is the reason. What season are you talking about?
Right.
Because if they say, well, the season of Jesus' birth. Well, hang on a second. This isn't the season of Jesus' birth. The one thing we're absolutely certain of is He was not born in winter. He could be born at potentially all 3 other seasons, just not this one.
yeah, because over there they wouldn't be out in the fields, right?
There's nothing growing out in the fields. When you're a shepherd and it's wintertime out in that part of the world, your animals are in being fed the stuff you've collected in the other seasons to feed them. Because being out is, you want to kill all your flocks, take them out there. Furthermore, shepherds don't sleep out in the fields in the winter.
They try to avoid that.
No, they are not an opposite season with us.
Not in that latitude.
They're not an opposite season with us.
Things I noted was the continual direction that God gives to people throughout the stories in the Bible of going to Egypt for safety, oddly enough. Despite Egypt being a picture of the world,
Right.
oftentimes they are taken from Israel and sent to Egypt for safety.
Yeah.
Well, because Israel's corrupt at the time usually, or whatever.
So badly.
Well, and what you've got is God using even a very worldly system as a means of protection, because the existing state of the place that He is in is even more hostile.
It's worse, yeah. And
Even worse.
The interesting correlations you can draw between their flight to Egypt
Yeah.
and the original Israelites moving to Egypt. Joseph was the one who was in charge of them when they were in Egypt.
Right.
Joseph was also the father here. That was where the nation was birthed in the Hebrew land,
Right.
and went to Israel to grow up. And Jesus kind of grows up a little bit in Egypt, comes back to Israel later on.
Well, if you have warring tribes, then maybe go to Egypt, where there's power over your boundaries.
Powerful God that protects you there. Doesn't mind you living there.
It was only there because God puts them there anyway. Pharaoh doesn't remember, or God raised him up for His own purpose, or Pilate was told you don't have any power except what comes from above. I mean, that's pretty clear.
He's had an interesting relationship with Israel over the last hundreds and hundreds of years, too.
So there's one final thought that I want to give you here on this, and why this is so important. Okay? So whenever the word of the Lord is given, the Holy Spirit confirms that this is the word of the Lord in our conscience, and we accept or reject that confirmation from the Holy Spirit. Okay? The Holy Spirit's given to convict everyone of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And we know the difference between right and wrong because of that message from God through our conscience. Now, if we want to continue trying to tell people that at this time we are trying to celebrate the birth of Jesus because God did these things according to our story, and our story is not correct, do we think that the Holy Spirit is going to be convincing people that it's true or that it's false? False is the only answer, right? And so as we are trying to influence other people, if our influence is going to be valid at all, it has to be in truth only. Otherwise, the Holy Spirit does not attend to our testimony, and we are not then going to be speaking rightly to them. What happens when they later discover this? What happens to the rest of our testimony?
Ignore it out of hand.
This is why this is so important. So it goes for whether we're influencing our children as we raise them, or whether we're influencing other people in our lives. We can't, in one sense, say, I'm representing the truth and I want to show you how to be a Christian, and then turn around and represent a lie and tell them it's Christian, and expect them to follow us. That's an untenable position to try to put ourselves in. And so this is why, for me, I'm very careful about this particular subject, and make sure I handle it as well as I can to not confuse whatever's going on during this time with the birth of Jesus. Does that make sense?